Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw lips in graphite. Now the tips that I'm going to be sharing in this video can be applied to any other human portrait, and the first thing that I want to do is make this element as simple as I can. Now I personally find that when drawing lips it's a little bit more of a complicated element, very similar to the complexity of hands and feet. If we don't get the lights and darks accurate, then it can really change the expression of the face. So I do want to be making sure that this is my first priority. Now this makes the entire process much simpler. So you can see here that I'm separating the top lip from the bottom lip with this center darker line. Now I'm just focusing on the shapes that I can see. So if it narrows up at the ends and it gets thicker in the center where you've got those slight thicker curves, I want to be mapping those in first. That there gives me something that I can aim for, and when I look back at my reference photo, back at my drawing, I know exactly where I need to be. Now once I've done that, you can see here that I'm now mapping in my base layer for the top lip. Now what I did to start with is used a paper blending stump and just applied graphite powder for my very first layer. Now I'm going in with my graphite pencils and just refining the textures. I'm still not hinting at any real detail that's going to be sitting on the top, so those brightest highlights I'm going to be leaving until the last layer. But for this, I just want to be mapping in and building up my values. So now I'm switching between my lights and darks, gradually building up to my darker pencils and working with some shading techniques. So it's the shading and building up and refining the highlights, midtones and shadows that creates any three-dimensional look. It doesn't matter what it is that we're drawing, the values here, especially with graphite, given that it is a grayscale medium, this is what's going to make that portrait look photorealistic. Now something I speak a lot about in all tutorials is the importance of subtle layers, and here is a prime example. I am building up all of those midtones first, and then I'm going to be refining my shadows as I go. Here I'm starting to now darken up some of those subtle creases on the top lip, giving a little bit more definition and three-dimensional shape. And then I'm going to come in with my erasers and then lift up some graphite and hint at my highlights. Now the way that you use your erasers is going to be impacted depending on how you've applied the graphite. Now this is something that I do focus my real-time tutorials on via Patreon. So if you are interested in any of my real-time step-by-step tutorials, then I will link my Patreon in the description below. Now here, in terms of building up that graphite, the one thing that I always ensure of is that I don't use excessive pressure on the pencils when I'm building up my layers. If I flatten the tooth of the paper and burnish, which is where you are getting rid of any tooth of that paper, that tooth of the paper helps to grip that graphite and help to build up those values, therefore depth and realism. If I flatten that out, it's going to be very hard for me to then build up additional layers. But because I've forced more of that graphite into the tooth of the paper, the erasers can have a very hard time actually lifting that back off of that paper. So your highlights can appear dull and almost a little bit muddy, muted looking. So if you're finding that your erasers are not working as well as you would like, it may be due to how the graphite's been applied. Now again, because that is something that plays a very important role in how the graphite portraits look when finished, this is something that I do really focus on thoroughly in the Patreon versions. So onto the lower lip, and something that I talk about in all tutorials, both here on YouTube and on Patreon, is the importance of light source. Now on the lower lip there are far more brighter highlights than there were on the top lip. So you can see here that I'm paying a bit more attention to where my darker graphite pencils should go. I'm allowing more of those lighter layers to show through. Now in relation to that, if there was a particularly bright highlight here on the eye, any area of a portrait, I would recommend to allow the white of the paper to show through. If you then needed to darken that highlight, we can do that easily with a light layer of graphite. But it's always worth, with that bright highlight, to allow the white of the paper to be visible, so that then we know we've got that highlight as bright as we could ever get it, and then we can darken that up in stages where required. But for the lip, I didn't feel like the highlights were as bright as the reflections in the eye and the corners of the eye, so I didn't feel like I needed the white of the paper there to show through, which is why I did have a thin layer of graphite, and then I've used my Tombow mono eraser there to lift that graphite back up and add my highlights. And throughout all of this, it's always been about refining those highlights and shadows and getting that good contrast. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If you've got any questions about this or anything art related, feel free to pop them in the comments below because I'm more than happy to help if I can. Here's a photo of my finished drawing, and as I've said, if you would like to draw along to the real-time version, the reference photo, line art and full material list are available on Patreon now. And I do also have a Patreon library on my website which lists all of the tutorials that are available on Patreon, which you get immediate access to as soon as you sign up. Now the wonderful thing about Patreon is it's really flexible, so you can stay for as long as you want or you can cancel at any time. If this video was helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up because it makes a huge difference to my channel. And I also upload a couple of videos here to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to be uploading another video here in the next few days.